Welcome to Second Table, where we discuss spirituality, philosophy, and psychology. I'm your host, Winston Janis. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Second Table podcast. Today, I'm here with Dan Koch, who is the host of the You Have Permission podcast and has been the host of a number of other podcasts, including Depolarize and Reconstruct. Dan's a doctoral student in counseling psychology at Northwest University in Kirkland, Washington. He's also the co-creator of the website soyou'redeconstructing.com. Thanks for being here, Dan.
That is the most tightly knit and comprehensive bio I think I've had read in any of these interviews. Nice job, Winston. We were talking a minute ago about our shared history of panic disorder.
Yeah.
And I was saying how, it's also in remission for me. I don't really get panic attacks very rarely. And even if I do, they're pretty mild. But I tried this hopped kombucha this morning.
Oh, yeah.
That just it popped up on my online grocery ordering. And I was like, that looks good. I'm going to try it. And I thought I knew how much caffeine was in it, but I think that it was caffeine per serving and there were 2 servings. And caffeine is something I am very sensitive to, and it relates to my anxiety.
Yeah.
And so I have just been on fire today.
Oh, man.
And I'm over caffeinated. I'm trying to self-medicate and correct that with this Fort George IPA here, which may or may not work. But if I am overly talkative and kind of cloying and annoying, it's the kombucha's fault. It's not what I'm normally like.
Well, that's you just reframe it as excitement, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
I'll cognitively reframe it.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. It's like I always kind of I wish I was one of those people that could just enjoy coffee more, because I actually love the taste of coffee and all that, and the ritual of it, a nice warm drink. But same thing, it's once in a while it'll hit me in a good way, but then usually there's even after that, there's kind of that jitteriness afterwards, or I'm still tired. I'm just kind of now I'm shaky and tired or whatever.
Yeah, tired and shaky. That's the worst. That's how I was feeling about an hour ago.
Yeah.
Because I get tired in the afternoons and just naturally, and I was still shaky. But I hung out with my son a little bit, got centered.
Right.
I'm ready to go.
Yeah.
Now.
Yeah, get into the heart space and all that,
Sure, whatever you want to call it. Yeah.
Right. No, I just I feel like I'm the same way, my kids can kind of be they can either be a huge provocation of anxiety or
right.
Sort of an antidote as well.
Soren's 11 months, so the worst thing he can really do is just take a shit, and
yeah.
It's really stinky, but he's not colicky or anything. He is a very well, he's got a good disposition and stuff. So
yeah,
unless he's really having a rough day, tired, teething or something, he is generally a net plus for my mood.
Well, you're right, and you're also in the pre-toddler years, so you have some initiation to go through yet, probably.
Yes, I do. I still do for sure.
Yeah, not to take away hope or anything, but
I'm just enjoying this little phase right now. The
enjoy it. Yeah.
Calm before the storm. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, like I said, just before we were just kind of chatting a little bit about how I was really excited to talk to you because we both have sort of podcasts dealing with progressive Christianity. You're a seminary grad. We both.
No, actually, didn't go to seminary.
Oh, okay.
I'm self-taught theologically.
Oh.
And I went to school for philosophy, undergrad, but I didn't really absorb all that much. And then have just kind of self-taught theology through, sheer fanaticism and interest.
Okay, I guess because I listened to one of the episodes. I think it was the one where you were launching the Deconstructing website, and how
Sari has a seminary degree. My co-author of that website might be her that you're thinking of.
Yeah, maybe. I know you had a group of friends there, and it sounded like you all had
yes, we went to this thing, but it was actually a seminar that Fuller put on because Sari ended up working at Fuller after she graduated from there, and she put this thing together, which is how we met in person. But I was there actually with a bunch of theologians and philosophers but I was there as and psychologist. I was there as a media person.
Yeah.
Hadn't started my program yet, and was just kind of covering it and interviewing people and whatnot.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, that's really, why I wanted to kind of talk to you as well is just, I feel like a lot of what you're doing is kind of the work that I was sort of aspiring to. I was like, I want to start a podcast and a blog about progressive Christianity, kind of because I was raised, I was raised, kind of Catholic on my mother's side, but then on my father's side, I got exposed to a lot of different kind of conservative Christian, Assemblies of God and Southern Baptist and non-denominational Christian. And, I went to Gordon College, which is a non-denominational.
In Massachusetts.
Yep. Went to Massachusetts. So, I know that world in a lot of ways. So when I almost feel like, when I first decided to go to seminary, I was like, I'm probably going to have to be Unitarian Universalist because the Christians won't accept me, because my beliefs are kind of so
Oh, because you thought because of the exposure that you'd had, the limited exposure, you probably didn't know that UCC was what it was, or
that's true.
Methodists
I actually,
or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Like I had pretty limited exposure to all the kind of progressive theology. I had this strong interest and passion in religion and spirituality, and I kind of went on an exploration of like Eastern religious traditions. Like I really got into Buddhism, and then I learned about Unitarian Universalism, and I'm like, okay, well, this could be maybe because I just wanted to go down that ministry path, But then once I was in seminary, it was kind of like another world opened up. It was kind of crazy to have it happen at that stage,
And okay, so I know that you were, and you still have your mental health license, but
Yes.
you were basically a therapist of some sort for a while. When did you do seminary? Was it after you'd been practicing for a bit?
Yeah. So, I like I said, I went to Gordon. I studied philosophy in Gordon, and then afterwards, I was
So
kind
we
of
had the same undergrad too. Look at that.
Yeah, a lot in common, man. So then I was like, what do I want to do? I want to do something kind of working with people, helping people, maybe having deep conversations with people, right? So I thought counseling, talking about life and solving life's problems and all that. So, I went to a master's program in counseling and graduated from that. Ended up moving to North Carolina with my wife, and kind of did fell into work with addictions counseling, and I did that for a couple of years, and then like I said, that's the one that kind of really wanted to go into the ministry seminary. That's really where my heart was at with spirituality, and I always had that Christian component there, but it wasn't integrated for a while, and then then I went to seminary, and I had such a hard time kind of deciding on a denomination that I truly wanted to commit to, that and I discovered there was a whole different set of hoops, right, to sort of jump through, and the whole ordination process is a big thing, no matter which denomination you kind of go with. So I ended up kind of, and that's kind of where the anxiety stuff came in too. I was like, what am I doing? And I don't know. It just a lot of stuff came up. So,
career stuff is naturally has a lot more juice.
Yeah, and I was already in
anxiety.
Right. And I was already in parenthood at that stage and stuff that. So
just forget about it. Yeah.
Right. So I kind of decided, and part of that too, right? The anxiety coming up, I was like, wow, this gives me a whole new level of insight into firsthand experience into a mental health issue, And so I decided to go back to counseling for another couple of years before I decided to finish the ordination process with the UCC, United Church of Christ. So it was a windy journey.
It might be an interesting place for us to start. I mean, it's up to you, of course, it's your show, but taking basically opposite paths between those two vocations. So I assumed that I would get a theology degree for years and years.
Yeah.
And then, although I didn't, and then I even felt called to ministry at one point, but I didn't feel called to the pastorate.
Yeah.
And that was confirmed actually quite easily when I, in my discernment process, mentioned this call to ministry to a number of friends who were ministers.
Uh-huh.
Every single one of them, I think there were 4 or 5 of them, said, I totally believe that's true for you, Dan. Also, probably not a parish pastor. I was like, okay, I don't know if I should take that as a compliment or not, but it felt right to me. And so for me, ministry is ended up being, it started with the podcasts, but now I'm considering the psychology work to be
Right.
a form of ministry. And you were doing psychology work, and boom, we switched over to full-time ministry and dealing in the explicitly ministerial world.
Yeah.
Right? That right there is an interesting. It'd
Yeah.
be interesting to kind of unpack that.
Yeah, right. Like one question that immediately comes up for me is, I'm just curious if do you have an understanding of like why they said, sure, you're called to ministry, just not pastoral, congregational kind of ministry.
That's a good question. I could frame it in terms of strengths or weaknesses. I'll try and do both.
Yeah.
So if I were to frame it in terms of strengths, I think that and because this was now like 3 or 4 years ago, so I don't remember these conversations very clearly,
Mm-hmm.
but something like, Dan, you're good at like dealing with these complex questions, pretty abstract stuff, pretty complex stuff. You're not going to get to do very much of that in your day-to-day work. If you end up pastoring a congregation, it's a lot more practical, kind of day in, day out, making sure people's lives are
Right.
going well, like helping them connect dots with social services, all that kind of stuff. So that would be the strengths way of putting it. And then I think the weaknesses way of putting it was like, you are insufficiently morally formed such that you will get bored and you will actually resent your congregants for not, wanting to think about and deal with the stuff that you are interested in. That one's interesting because I will end up having, of course, clients who will, and exactly. I will have some choice in terms of the type of clients I want to see. But obviously, the general approach is like, I will accept anybody as they are, and we'll see what we can do, So It's funny. I wonder if some of that will end up being true. Maybe I will actually not like having clients, and maybe I'll want to do assessment, or I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, or kind of like research or something like that.
Yeah. Not full time. I mean, I didn't take this is a little inside baseball, but I didn't go the like full research path, like go to the best university, like with the research pedigree and have a thesis idea that's based in the literature. I just didn't. I took the clinical, I will have a practice path, which I do want to practice. So that was not a difficult decision for me.
Yeah, I mean, you clearly like talking to people, right?
Yeah. I don't just want to be in a lab. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I already am enjoying my beginning forays into peer-reviewed research, and I think I will probably keep that up. We'll see.
Right.
Just as a part-time thing.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. There's a lot of overlap. There's a lot of parallels with these two sort of career choices, especially in this day and age. I mean, you think about it, like psychology wasn't even an actual field of study until like Freud, right? But
yeah, just really psychoanalysis anyway. He basically invented it like a little over 100 years ago. Before that, they were only doing like what we would call psychometrics. So they were like measuring response time, that kind of like very, very mathematical kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Not really like what we think of today as counseling and therapy.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, my side is like, I've had a lot of insecurities about how introverted I am. And
funny that you would start a podcast then.
I know, right? Well, I love talking about these things, and and right, it's a funny kind of paradox to where, and I've heard actually a number of pastors are like, yeah, I'm introverted too. Like it's a really common thing for pastors, right? Which is a little surprising.
Do you have a job where like you don't have to be interacting, all day with people, like your particular gig?
Like, do I?
do you have to interact with people all week, or do you only have to interact with people a couple hours a day or something like that?
Well, I think it's really unique situation right now because of COVID.
Right.
So
You're like
I,
one of the few
yeah.
pastors thriving in COVID because you're an introvert.
I know, right? Yeah. No, I mean, we're, our congregation's doing well. Like people are still kind of like, giving to the church even during this
Hmm.
time. And so I kind of have daily interactions with our small staff, but, and then I have a few small groups and stuff like that that we're part of through Zoom.
Yeah.
But other than that, it's really limited. So, yeah, it's I don't know. I think it's going to be a different ball game once kind of COVID sort of goes away, hopefully
Yeah.
eventually. But yeah, I just that was a big insecurity for me because I do notice that I have a tendency to kind of, you know, kind of withdraw maybe sometimes from people, and yet I also notice like I have a real like this is kind of gets to the like the kind of the inverse paths we were talking about. Like so in counseling. I noticed that a lot of the people that I was working with, a lot of the clients, like those who were not doing well, usually were reporting a lack of social support or unhealthy relationships in their life, right? And then those who were doing good, they said I got strong support. I have close family. I have close friends who are really supporting me in my recovery or whatever it is. And then I kind of noticed that in my own experience, and when I also I mean the science supports that, right? Like there are studies out there that talk about all the benefits of community. Like I often will reference like the Harvard study of adult development. Like it's like the longest study that's ever been done on health and human well-being, and you don't see studies that last that long. They had to like kind of find people to take over the study because the people who had been there initially were like retiring or dying, so and the number like the key insight from that was the people who did well, they had close friends and family. They had positive relationships in their lives. So it's just a pattern I started noticing in counseling. Like I really value, obviously, the whole field of psychology and counseling, but I also was noticing that like this is a bigger issue that like it needs like the issues that we face in our society need to be addressed with more than just seeing a therapist, right? Like people
Yeah.
need community, they need relationships in order to find well-being. And so my combined interest in spirituality and Christianity and community building, right? I was like, I think that this is really what makes people happy in life is having a supportive community in their lives.
Totally. And one of the big questions for me moving forward is just how do I think, like, how do we deal with the fact that therapy is so expensive?
Mm,
And, one-on-one therapy. One of the things I'm interested in is group therapy. And one of the reasons I'm actually a primary reason I'm interested is that it shows really good results, but it is much cheaper for people.
yeah.
And you don't get the same individual care, but you have like more possible mirrors with which to see your own story, and different kind of narratives to grab onto for your own struggles.
Yeah. And
And
the clients
yeah.
also get an opportunity to not only experience like getting help, right? And
Hmm.
receiving help, but also
But giving
giving,
it.
giving
Hmm.
help. And that is also in itself like, oh, I'm useful.
Right.
I'm part of something. Like my life has meaning because I'm helping other people. Like they get to experience that.
Yep. So as you were talking, I pulled this study up. There is a famous study by this guy Lambert, and they did he did, I believe it's he, did a big meta review of all the literature on all of the effectiveness of therapy, and every study that separated out multiple factors from each other and attempted to measure them. And this has been pretty much the accepted wisdom now for 20 years that there's like a pie chart. Basically, there's a simplified pie chart. And the 15% of it comes from someone's expectation that therapy will help them. So
Hmm.
that's basically placebo effect or willingness to be there. The therapeutic relationship, so the stuff that is, this is common to any modality of therapy. So it could be a psychoanalyst, it could be, like a Freudian guy, it could be like CBT, could be whatever. That's 30%. It's just your relationship with the therapist and the common factors. 15% is specific techniques, so your specific modality, and then 40% is extra therapeutic factors. These are things not covered in therapy and not about placebo of I'm going to change. And the number one extra therapeutic factor is social support. And
Hmm.
so that is like not only does it make sense, but it's right. And so if you can increase people's social support, you can do at least as much as like someone does by specifically being a Freudian analyst or specifically being a cognitive behavioral therapist, or like just giving people social support, you are accomplishing, to the extent that you are entirely responsible for their social support, which of course you'd never be 100% responsible, but if you can work toward that, you are working towards people's wellness.
Right. Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
there's, of course, there's the thing that can't measure, which is people being willing to go to therapy at all. And I think a lot of that has to do with social support as well, that people
Right.
feel accepted for that. They have some kind of plausibility structure that this is a thing that normal people do, all that stuff too, which again, a social group or a church group can help foster that for people.
Right. Right. Yeah. But, it gets into so much about like our society is in such a sort of point of transition in a way with all of the
Yeah.
rapid changes in our technology, probably that more than anything, and
Yeah.
worldview and scientific understanding of everything. And it's like, I feel like a lot of the work I'm interested in is all about overcoming stigma, right? Because there's a stigma associated with going to therapy, right? And
Yeah.
having mental health issues, which we like all do pretty much, right? On
Oh
some
yeah.
level,
Oh
everyone
yeah.
is dealing with this stuff. And yeah, I was preparing for a sermon I'm going to be recording this week. And I was talking a bit about like the role of technology in our social lives. Like this is why I'm interested in ministry. It's like, I see the church as a really very potentially powerful institution for just good stuff in people's lives, right? That's why I'm interested in all this, and that's why I really gravitated towards a couple of the episodes I listened to on your podcast, which talked about like the failures of the church, or the surprising benefit of mega churches. Like what is the church of the future? Because I think church has had an extremely beneficial effect on people's lives. But also, I think, as you know, right, you're studying this in your doctoral program, like negative effects as well. So it's like, yeah, I think they're right. There's almost like a stigma attached today, and rightly so, almost, I would add, a stigma that's been attached to religion and Christianity in particular. There's so much baggage that comes along with it. It's like the constant question, I think we're all wrestling with, or a lot of us, or I am wrestling with, is like, can this baggage be overcome so that we can kind of see some of the real value that the Christian tradition offers us, Yeah.
Well, I part of me is grateful in a kind of a dark way that the word evangelical is the one that got attached to the Christian Trump supporters,
Mm.
because I think that does not, in most people's minds, mean Christian. That they recognize that it is a subset, that they are Christians, but that they're not the only Christians,
Mm-hmm.
and that they're, for instance, distinct from Catholics and from Black Protestants and whatever. That people, I mean, my hope is that evangelicalism will bear the brunt of the what now will be probably a pretty catastrophic fallout, especially with people under 50
Mm.
in America. And they have their own coming to terms that they will need to do with that. I haven't been functionally a part of that community for almost 20 years.
Yeah.
But that's its own very interesting question. But my hope is that other formulations of Christianity will not be so impacted by that stigma. I think today that is very clearly the strongest source of negative stigma is the white evangelical support of Trump. Now, what's funny is if you're in red rural America, churches are growing. It is actually easier to invite your friends to church. It is in those communities, it is like, and I'm getting this from a very good David French article, which he quoted this guy, Ryan Burge, who is on an upcoming episode with me going through some of that research. But basically, in rural red America, right now, the last 4 years have been a great time to be a Christian. It's like, oh yeah, we all love Trump, and you want to come to our church, and it was just like an easy in. It's like greasing the wheels of friendship evangelism.
Man.
Whereas for people like my wife and I who live on the coast with a bunch of liberals, it's like, yeah, ask me again in 4 years, maybe. Like, I've been immunized to church until at least this piece of shit is out of the White House,
right.
kind of a thing. And so that is its own interesting question. So it's almost like in America, where does the church go? There actually are two separate questions. There is the church. Everything in America now is split along socio-political, ideological, and geographical lines. And there are two Americas, and increasingly so. And so the church in each of the Americas is like its own separate question in some sense, and really should be measured separately, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, man.
But you're in a weird situation in that sense, because you are in, I don't know what, I don't recognize the city that you're in Minnesota, but it's not Minneapolis or St. Paul.
Yeah,
is it a suburb?
Well, it's actually like the sort of the headquarters of like where Mayo Clinic is. That's like the biggest thing here in Rochester.
Okay.
So yeah, it's a small size city, but it's like where like I think an hour and a half south of Minneapolis.
So you honestly, where you live is one of the only type of places, I think, left in America with any kind of real mix, of the two cultures. Like smaller Midwestern cities are basically, that's it. Because every coastal city is 70% plus liberal, and every rural area is 80% plus Republican.
Right.
And, there are increasingly few places where anybody genuinely mixes with other than family members or something like that.
Yeah, it's crazy you mentioned that, because like we used to live in Asheville, North Carolina. That's where I'm still a licensed therapist in North Carolina. And
in Asheville, nice.
Yeah, and Asheville is like a very sort of liberal, sort of like a hippie town, very artsy.
It's like Austin, Texas. Yeah, exactly.
But it's surrounded by Bible Belt kind of territory.
Yeah.
So yeah, man. It's scary. Me and my wife, Jessica, were just kind of going back and forth being like, I don't know, is a civil war going to happen? I don't know. It can't be possible. What would that even look like? Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, I think that, in terms of physical violence, it seems like skirmishes and terrorism basically are the worst. Domestic terrorism are sort of the worst versions of that, because there's no like battle line.
Right.
There's no front.
Right.
Which is good, but it could get, the cultural civil war stuff. I only see it going up for a while. We'll see. Hopefully not.
Yeah. It's just crazy. It's so crazy how Christianity can be so twisted and misconstrued. And yet that's all projected onto sort of progressive Christianity, right? They're the ones that are being inauthentic to the true gospel. It is insane to be able to level the critiques that I always heard about liberal Christians at conservative Christians, at least in strong form for the last 5 years or so. Yeah. And it's like I've heard you talk about sort of the it's like, why are you still a Christian? It's like I feel like Christianity is actually more relevant today than ever because of within the Christian and Jewish traditions, kind of speaking truth to power, sort of critiquing power structures, and Jesus's willingness to sit down at the table with, which was itself a radical thing. Like obviously, like in first century Jesus's context, you don't sit down with people who are considered Gentiles or unclean or outsiders. And Jesus is sitting down with these people and eating with them, which is an intimate act in and of itself. Yeah. People who are, looked at as enemies or outsiders or impure, so.
Yeah, there will be, that's going to be the battle line to cross now, is depending on what side you're on. If someone that you look up to is willing to associate with people on the other side, that's the new prostitutes and tax collectors for you. and it goes exactly both ways across the battle lines, right? So if I have if I interview Trump voters and genuinely try and understand them, some segment of my listenership will feel betrayed by that. Like I'm giving air to the enemy, basically. And
right.
And of course, I'm sure conservative Christians, to the extent that they even are aware of me, already feel that way about what I'm doing with liberals. That's something that you kind of, as starting a progressive Christian podcast, you sort of sign up for that kind of critique because it's coming. You can write your hate mail yourself before you ever get it. Although I get so little, which just makes me think it must not be very popular.
Yeah, you must not be well known enough.
I'm not well known enough. They're not writing about me. I put it this way. Here's my prediction, which may never come to pass. If I ever get specifically mentioned in a Gospel Coalition article, that's when I'll start getting hate mail.
Right.
But they don't know who I am at this point, so I'm hate mail free.
Well, we'll see. I think you're much more well known probably at this point than I am. But yeah.
What does it take to make it into one of those like critical of progressive Christian articles?
I know.
To join with the Jen Hatmakers and liturgists of the world and Rob Bells. I think that's when you've made it in our world, is when you get it, when the Gospel Coalition gives you shit. That's like getting your Grammy,
Right,
you did
it. I know, you finally reached that level. Yeah. Oh yeah. It's all just crazy.
I'll say this though. I agree with you that it's a really great time for Christianity. Yeah. It's a great time for something that is centered on the ministry of Jesus and his constant pushing against tribal markers and boundaries is just exactly what we need.
Right. And yeah. Well, go ahead.
I don't want to baptize Jesus into like a political moderate, because everybody can turn Jesus into what they want Jesus to be.
Yeah.
But he was sort of undeniably uninterested in tribal identity. And the Good Samaritan is probably the most famous pushback. But his interaction with the Samaritan woman at the well, I'm blanking on other examples, but it's
right.
It's we are children of Abraham. Like God can raise children from these stones. Like and of course some of that is specific to the Jews of his time, him being himself a Jew. But the principles, of course, apply. And the idea is like, he who does the will of my Father is my brother and sister.
Yeah.
And loving your enemies, and of course all that stuff. Literally preaching to the choir here, I guess, to you and your listeners. But it is a good time for that. And it's a time where that is needed. And it's a time where, to the extent that I succeed in that, I expect to be challenged by my more liberal friends.
Yeah, I mean,
not all of them, of course, but
yeah, it's like, it is so weird because, Jesus was obviously like a kind of a rebel, kind of an iconoclast, but it's so funny how, the different groups can kind of co-opt that image, right? I'm just thinking on the conservative sides, they're like, oh, well, Jesus, this all this stuff they say the progressive stuff is just following the culture, going with the flow of what's all the change, and so, but it's crazy because that's what makes Christianity in a sense so universal, is it encompasses all of this stuff, to where like there's a degree to which one of the reasons why Christianity still holds meaning and relevance for me is because it's I think we need, during this time of massive change and fluctuation, in our understanding of self and gender and the universe and technology and who we are, we need a kind of groundedness. We need a sense of continuity with our our spiritual
Totally
ancestors.
Totally agree.
We need to find some sort of grounding, and not just feel like, okay, well, now everything's out the window, and we're just these kind of people who, science is great. I am obviously not like anti-science on any level, but like there are certain things that are more on the level of the soul, and I think that there's been human beings around for thousands of years that have been wrestling with this stuff and thinking about this stuff, and to just discount that all as irrelevant and outdated, I think is very unwise.
Well, and some of that can be laid at the feet of sort of intellectually dishonest, or maybe or self-deceived Christian thought leaders and authors and stuff like that, and apologists who were so excited about their project that they thought that it could do more than it could do, right? So people have come to expect that Christianity is disproven anytime there's a new scientific discovery or something like that, because they have been primed to expect that by a bunch of Christian leaders. And so to that extent, it's not on them that they experience it that way. And what we need is like better leadership that is not arguing for God of the gaps.
Right.
But let me ask you a question. I have an idea myself. I'd like to know what you think. Why do you think it is so easy? Or maybe my question is, what do you think the mechanism is for people being able to make Jesus into so many mutually incompatible versions that happen to work for them? Like, what do you think is going on there?
Oh, man, that's a good question. I don't know that I have an answer to that. I might have to think about that a little bit.
Well, okay, I'll start with mine, and then you can comment or go from there. So I like the work of Jonathan Haidt, the social and moral psychologist who wrote The Righteous Mind. And he really likes the work of David Hume, the philosopher. And Hume said, as I understand it, that the reason is and ought to be the slave of the passions. Now, I don't think that it ought to be the slave of the passions, but I think that he's right that it is the slave of the passions. That, like, in actuality, most of the time, people have some emotional state, some loyalty, some leaning, some love or desire, and then they rationalize that feeling that they have. And so when you ask someone why they believe something or do something, usually their reasons are not the real reasons that they would give you. They are the reasons that are appropriate to give for that action, that have either been accepted or that make them feel good about themselves or something like that.
Yep.
So you will say, like, well, I'm a libertarian because I think government should be small. Well, okay, probably not. Probably you really like John Wayne movies, or something like that. Like, and I don't know. I mean, I don't mean to pick on libertarians, but it's true for anybody. A friend recently told me a story of, he brought up to a female super liberal friend of his, Jonathan Haidt, and she said, "Is he white?" And he said, "Yeah." And she's like, "I don't want to hear about it." So, okay, that's an example of, like, obviously reason is not what's at play there. It is loyalty. It is some loyalty to some narrative, some cause that she perceives, like some just cause, right? Where it's like, it's better for her to never listen to white men, at least for some period of time. That's not reason. I mean, you could argue for it maybe on some other grounds.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's the mechanism in making Jesus into whoever we want. Jesus is presented as multifaceted in the text, and especially if you want to be like Mark Driscoll and bring in the Jesus of Revelation, which I would argue is not supposed to be read at the same level of granularity as the Jesus of the Gospels. Then you really have a lot to choose from, and you pick the ones, and you do this unconsciously. You pick the ones that line up with what you're already committed to and what you already believe and feel.
Yep.
And so that is what I think is the mechanism, basically.
Yeah, it's a scary mechanism because, like, to what extent are we doing that on both sides?
That's why I said I don't want to turn him into a political moderate. But that's, and I'm sure my liberation theology friends would be like, he was not a political moderate, Dan. So I'd have to do some work there. But yeah, it's very hard to navigate all that.
But I do think you're right. There's a couple thoughts with that. It's like it made me think of. I heard this story once about this hypnotist that was in a classroom, and I can't remember where I heard this, but he hypnotized one of the kids to like go and put a pencil in this other girl's ear, right? And then when I snap my fingers, you won't remember why you did that or that I even told you to do it or anything, right? And then so he snaps his fingers, and then afterwards asks the kid, he's like, "Why'd you put that pencil in her ear?" And he's like, "I don't know. I thought it would look nice there." Like he found a reason.
Exactly.
And I think part of it too is like, there's a couple other thoughts with that is like, if this is something that people were raised with, like this is the tradition of my parents and their parents and my grandparents and great grandparents. Right. It's like that becomes like the institution that you want, that becomes an authority, right? And so you want to adhere to that. Like I think we find this even in the Bible itself, right? So where obviously like Jesus and these other great spiritual figures, like they came and made a profound impact on, Jesus made a profound impact on his followers and a lot of people who heard him. And then, spiritual communities started around that. But then obviously when you kind of include fallible human beings into the mix, they're going to start making it about like, you find like really anti-Semitic things in scripture, right?
Oh yeah.
So it's right there, right from the very beginning, where people are using Jesus for political agendas that don't really fit with that are kind of changed, that don't really fit with what I think the overarching sort of spirit of Jesus is that we get, which is that of compassion and acceptance and love and loving our enemies and accepting the other and preferential option for the poor and all that. But that's not what you always read in scripture, right?
That's true. It also, if you zoom out, it kind of gets into the trend of deconstruction that we find, especially with those raised evangelical, Baptist, etc., where you have to ask, I mean, you don't have to, but you might ask, how is it that entire groups of people can live with such fragile houses of cards for so long, such that a kid makes like one gay friend or one Catholic friend and like the whole thing tumbles down? Like, how is it possible that it could have stood so long? Is like usually we ask, well, how do you end up doubting it? But another question is like, how did you not doubt it until now? Like that, with some of these views, like people who believe the King James version is the only translation of the Bible worth reading. It's fucking English. I mean, it's like it's from like the 1600s, like some insane stuff like that. But there are millions of Christians who believe that, and so the other way, the zoomed out way of asking questions, just like what's going on in human and group, individual and group psychology that can persist for someone for decades of their life,
Yeah.
and that's worth looking at, and then turning back on ourselves. Okay, so in what way am I just accepting some potential house of cards, that seems reasonable to me because the people that I'm around believe it.
Yeah, it's
and
like
that's the lesson for fundamentalists of all sorts, which includes leftist fundamentalists and every brand of fundamentalism, right?
Yeah, I mean, well, what it makes me think is that like, so I can't remember once again exactly where I heard this, but there was this discussion. I think it was like scientists talking about the brain and how our brains are sort of wired and predisposed to be sort of like distrustful or hostile towards the other. Because if you're in a tribe of hunter and gatherers, or a small village kind of thing, and all of a sudden you come across some outsiders, you're going to survive. You have a better chance of survival if you view those outsiders as potentially dangerous, right? That they might try to take your stuff and, slaughter your family,
Yeah.
basically.
If you're wrong, if you're right about that 1 out of 10, it's just better to be hostile 10 out of 10
Yeah. If
rather
you're
than letting them all in, and the 10th one everyone dies.
right, you want to be cautious, because if you're just kind of friendly to everyone and assume good
Right.
intentions, well, we've all seen Game of Thrones, right? It's like,
Yeah, the cautious tribes survive, basically.
exactly. So the ones that are distrustful, which is really a sad thing. And I feel like what we're seeing now is sort of human nature, that same mechanism operating on crack, right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
we're all in our echo chambers with social media. And so I think that answers that question of what you were saying, like, how did this survive for so long where they think the King James is the only correct version? Well, if other people start disagreeing, I think this kind of explains why we see this kind of heightened division right now, because once again, going back to something we've continually been talking about, is just the accelerated change. Like, I don't think society has changed this much for, I don't know, the last all of human history, right? Maybe like the Industrial Revolution or something like that. But
I
like,
bet it's faster than that. Yeah, I
yeah,
bet. I'm sure it's.
iPhones and
Yep.
gay marriage and the whole like
Yeah.
realizing that we're just a tiny blue dot in the vastness of
Hmm.
space. Like, all
Yeah.
of this stuff is like really brand new. So I really think that what we see with conservatism, like kind of like fundamentalist Christianity, is kind of like hanging on for dear life in a way,
Yes, I agree.
and being like, this is what's safe, this is what we know, and if we don't have this, then anxiety. I mean, just all I can say is anxiety. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yes, I think it's. I think there's some similar mechanism to conspiracy theories, although I would be sure that the Venn diagrams don't totally overlap.
Hmm.
But the idea of a simple answer when presented with a complex and inscrutable world
Yeah.
that is full of unknown terrors,
Right.
and just the sheer amount of emotional legwork that having a simple solution to that does for someone
Right.
moment to moment in their conscious experience. I mean, you get it. You get why it's powerful. You get why fundamentalism will always exist. You get why conspiracy theories will always exist, because they just do a lot of work. They do it in a way that gives you a false sense of security and a bunch of false beliefs,
Right. Right.
but it gets a lot of work done for your emotional state.
Yeah. Right. So I mean, I feel so. If we consider, I wonder if you would, what you would think of this is like, so progressive Christianity, or any kind of thing in that, going in that opposite direction, what it offers, but also its limitation, is that it's willing to sit with the uncertainty, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that oh, we look at progressive Christianity, we say, okay, something finally that honors my experience, my
Yes.
actual experience of life, right, is
Yeah,
uncertain. But at the same time, it's unattractive to a lot of people for that very same reason of like, I don't want a religion that doesn't give me the answers and certainty, doesn't sell that well.
yeah. I mean, and you do wonder to what extent progressive thinkers who also become progressive theologians, right? To what extent do they agree with the atheists philosophers, the existentialists and whatnot, that like actually it's all constructed, and you get different versions of that depending on what denomination you're in or what your pastor is like, or whichever authors you like. But I wonder if there is a middle way, in term like a way that takes the uncertainties and the ambiguity as a real and as a given, but then also recognizes the value of having some sort of unassailable group of principles that we don't need to question.
Yeah.
Now, those will never be the same ones that our fundamentalist friends have, but something like, you could pull 10 10 principles from the Sermon on the Mount or something and say, this is just what we're committed to.
Right.
These things are not up for debate for us. And
Like even
that's kind
Unitarian
of
Universalism has like their 8 principles and their sources and
right.
stuff like that.
Yeah. And I guess I don't know very much. You probably know a lot more about that community than I do. But I've had to recognize, I've had to basically do this for myself without a community is like, okay, because I could consider in each instance, like, well, maybe violence against neo-Nazis is good. If this and that, I could go down all the rabbit holes in any particular situation. And I've had to just realize that for my own peace of mind, like I'm just going, okay, it's the Sermon on the Mount to the best of my ability.
Hmm.
That's my backstop. And everything else will be questioned and has been and will continue to be. But in terms of the choices that I make, in terms of my prayer life, in terms of how I raise my kids, whatever, how I treat my community, that's just what I'm going to stick with. And not everybody's going to agree on that,
Yeah.
and it's become quite fashionable on the left to really question a lot of the enemy love stuff. And, because our enemies on the right have, frankly, especially with the end of Trump's term and the attempts to overturn the election and everything, I mean, have it's gotten truly unprecedented in certain ways, and it
Yeah.
has such a Christian sheen to it that it is like, I get it, it's so fucking galling to a Jesus following liberal to see your religion and your country dragged through the mud in the name of your savior. And like, it's really tempting to let that enemy love stuff go by the wayside for a while, but I've just
Yep.
been like, well, that's still what I'm committed to. So
Right.
I don't have that option here. And yeah, I don't know. My thoughts on this are not very well formed.
Well, I think there's a difference, right, between loving our neighbor and sort of, kind of condoning what our neighbor does. You know what I mean?
Right.
In their lives and in society. So, you know,
And it's an open question what loving an enemy looks like too. Like, could doing something that they really dislike but that's good for them be loving them? It doesn't mean that you won't necessarily have any conflict. Um,
right.
you know, I sent an email back to we all have these emails that certain family members will forward about conservative political causes and stuff. And this particular time, I went and I read the bill and I wrote back like, guys, here is where the misinformation is. And, like, I think that was loving my political enemy, which is actually a extended family member who is not my enemy in real life. That's a person that I love. But in politics, they're my enemy. And I was like, let's just maybe we could all agree on some news sources, like that
Yeah.
kind of a thing where that was loving that person, but it was not conflict free.
Yeah.
I called out the email directly,
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it might be a more complicated thing than I'm going to say, but like, I feel like right now in this moment, when I think about what it means to love another person, I would just say like, it's like not wishing them harm. It's seeing and recognizing that this is another human being like me who has hopes and desires and fears and dreams and goes through shit, and yeah, they're a human being, and I'm not going to wish them harm. I'm going to wish them well. And I think that can be, that can be love in and of itself. And you can still do
I
that.
think that is love. Yeah.
And you can still do that and still be critical and still even argue with that person or fight with that person, but still have like love for them and compassion for them.
I feel that one, man. It is hard for me to wish certain groups of people well, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's when I say I'm sticking with the Sermon on the Mount, that just means ideally.
Right.
I'm not necessarily succeeding in doing that, but I am trying to do that. But I will say some of the language around enemies in the text has fresh meaning these days in a way that it really didn't before.
Mm.
And I think for me, that's especially because of the explicit Christian overtones of so much of it. You know, um, Trump's Trump's most ardent supporters are very religious and very Christian.
Yeah.
Not all his supporters are. Many of them are, pretty non-religious, kind of just grievance politics. But his biggest cheerleaders are like Pentecostal pastors. I mean, it's like it is so it is just like deeply soul crushing
Yeah.
as a Christian. And so some of the text has really come alive to me as like, oh, this is maybe like how Christians coming out of communist Russia like had to think about, like they had to read these passages in a different way than I've had to read them growing up in basically an economic boom, upper middle class white existence in America. Like this historical anomaly where you don't really have any enemies. That's not most of human history.
Yeah.
And so, in that sense, I think some of us are like joining the ranks of most people over time and
Yeah.
having real enemies, that really do kind of trample on either
Mm.
your material well-being or your meaning, your spirituality, your religion.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's like it's an opportunity to practice like a more
It
real,
is.
authentic Christianity.
It
You
totally
know.
is. Yeah, it totally is.
Yeah.
And I'm not totally ready for it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
Truly.
I don't know. It's I wonder about one of the things I kind of wanted to touch on a little bit was just how it's almost like, do people convert to progressive Christianity? It's like I feel like a lot of the time it's people don't you don't evangelize to people, I think, they're completely unchurched and they kind of go to progressive Christianity. It's usually people who are already, it's somehow part of their lives, right? And they kind of go into more of a progressive mode. And
It's so interesting. I think some of that is historical accident. I think in the 60s, for instance, at the height of civil religion and the mainline denominations, probably plenty of people did come to Christianity through the more progressive
yeah,
denominations. But now we're so encultured that conservative Christianity is Christianity in America,
right.
that it's like, I don't know, there's all kinds of, there's a lot of really interesting research questions in what you just said that
Right.
I
I
don't
could
know the
see
answers
how
to.
people like you and I can't let go of Christianity because of seeing certain things in it. But I could also see how, for a lot of people who, honestly, doesn't seem like they've thought that much more deeply about it, but this is just something they were raised with and they were told, okay, this is sort of, this is the context in which we were raised. This is what we're going to belong to and hang on to and make into, strangely and paradoxically, into a kind of idol, But it's so deeply troubling and sad that, they've been able to make Jesus, who's this symbol of compassion and forgiveness and, sort of undermining power structures and all this stuff, into that very thing that Jesus stood against, I don't know.
Well, we could, it could be worse. We could be the confessing church in Germany, and we're trying to figure out how our 98% Lutheran country could have supported Hitler and
Yeah.
the Holocaust. So
Well,
it could be
sometimes I'm
worse.
like, it's not that far off,
I mean,
but I don't know.
it's more like, it's more like the psychological mechanisms are probably similar,
Right.
but the consequences are, of course, much graver in the
Yeah.
former. And but it is a kind of a, it's an analogous moment for
Right.
mostly younger and mostly more progressive Christians to be like, what the hell was I raised with if this is what it turned into?
Right.
And like pretty quickly when Trump was on the scene, it turned into this. Like
Yeah.
you didn't even really need that much foreplay, guys. Once Carson was out of the race, it was like pretty full embrace. And what does that mean? Like
Yeah.
how gullible, or I don't know. It's gullible is the wrong word. I thought gullible was the wrong word in 2016, and now I know that gullible is the wrong word. It's not about gullibility.
No.
It is. It's actually darker and more about formation and character, and some of it is about a genuinely conservative worldview, which is fine. And I don't have any issue with that.
Right.
That's great. We can disagree on that. But a lot of it is actually just the church. It's just a massive failure by the church to form Christians into Christ-like people, frankly,
Right.
who can spot demagoguery when they hear it and are not so consumed with their victimhood or whatever that they, you know, and there's a lot of reasons for that. And it's not all the church, you know, but you know, frankly, our parents' generation, statistically by and large, what did they do with their birthright? You know, they got the keys to culture because of their numbers and because of the power of the countercultural movement in the 60s and 70s. And what they do with it in the Christian world, they mostly became insular and afraid and apocalyptic and doing parallel institutions, you know, basically jerking each other off spiritually. There's the beer. That's what they chose, and then this is kind of the result of that. Is that's not
Right.
discipleship.
Yeah.
That's insularity. That's turning in on one's own subculture and basically imploding.
I know.
And that's not discipleship.
Yeah, it's
and so that's sad.
Yeah, it's really tricky. I mean, I know we're kind of probably running close up to our time.
And of course, it doesn't apply to everybody. That's not every boomer. And I'm sure the boomers that go to your church, for instance, this is not applying to most mainline Protestants. But I do understand that there's quite a few Trump lovers in a lot of these Midwestern mainline churches as well. Maybe just by sheer force of demographics and geography. You know?
Yeah. Well, you know, I mean, I think like you've mentioned in a couple occasions on your podcast, like that, you know, a good tree is supposed to bear good fruit, right? And like we would hope that Christianity, sort of done right, would produce, like you said, like you're talking about the failure of the church here, in that it's failed in so many different ways and on so many different levels. So yeah, it's like you can't blame people for just saying let's throw the whole thing out because they don't see any good fruit. Now I'm not saying there isn't good fruit, right? I think there is.
But they might not know where to look, and it might not be in their community, and you know.
Yeah.
Of course, that's not to say there's none. I'm sure everybody has goodness in them, and even some of the Trump-loving boomers that I know have other things in their lives where they are genuinely awesome and selfless and loving. It's just that on these other things, they have had a real lack of formation.
Right.
And just to be clear, I would not say this about Romney. People who like this is a unique Trump thing. This is not a Republican thing.
Yeah.
But like, if you really support Trump and really think he's good, you have been poorly formed morally. Now you could vote for him and not like him. That's not what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
But and I try to be really non-judgmental, listening. I am, but like, I don't see any other way around it.
Yeah.
I know I have blind spots and I don't know what they are, but this one is yours, and it's not your totality. It's not everything about you, right. But you are insufficiently morally formed at that point. You, in some way or another, either you are not courageous enough to sort of take a chance on not having your political whims met, or you're not shrewd enough, or I don't know what it is.
Right.
Or actually the saddest version is you have been formed by a leadership culture of fear in your faith communities for your entire life. And so you're just fucking afraid. And he is so good at exploiting fear. And that's what a lot of it is too. And that's not really people's fault. So that, there's some compassion.
It's that whole, once again, like the characteristic of fascism, that it's about going back to a previous point in history, which just ties back into the whole fear of the change that's happening and our movement towards the future and all that, But yeah,
Well, that's why fascism is always a conservative movement, and like revolutionary communism is always a liberal movement, because people who are conservative personality wise, they more often will frame good things as being in the past, and progressive people in their personality will frame them as being future oriented. So if you're trying to convince a conservative of something and you're a liberal, you should not do it by saying, just imagine the future that our kids could have. What you
right,
should say is, remember how this thing worked when you were a kid? I want that again. And then
right.
they go, yeah,
Yeah,
me too. That's how you frame it. And then vice versa. You don't say to a progressive, like, remember how in the 50s it was a progressive be like, shut up, man. You mean when black people couldn't vote? You
right.
know, like, I want 2050, like, give me something better kind of a thing. So
Yeah.
uh, all that stuff is tied into it, but I go on tangents all the time here, apparently.
No, I hear you. I mean, I think about that with like, the whole issue of climate change and everything. It's like
Yes.
we used to be in a time when we were more in harmony with nature and creation, right?
That would be the way to
Um,
frame it for conservatives. Yeah.
right. But yeah,
And
so
creation care conversation tries to do that some. I think there's some really sophisticated people working on how to phrase this stuff for conservative Christians that are doing good work.
that's
I
awesome.
should probably interview some of those people. That would be an interesting
Yeah. Yeah.
topic.
Yeah, so I'm just obsessed with that question of like having being in ministry right now and sort of just at the start of that career about like
Yeah.
what the future of the church is going to look like and all that. So I don't know how we're going to address all this stuff, but I know like I do think part of it is like Jesus did, maybe making space to sit down with those people who, like you mentioned, possibly interviewing people on your podcast who have really conservative views or whatever. I've thought about the same thing. I mean,
Yeah.
because I mean, in a way that is going to be at the very least probably pretty entertaining, right? So
I think the two things you can do as a progressive to lose listeners is to hear out conservatives, which I haven't really done yet on this show, but I did it on To Polarize, or criticize the Enneagram, which is what we did on my show this week, which will probably lose me some listeners because the Enneagram is our
yeah.
sacred cow.
So what happened with if you don't mind me asking real quick, the Depolarized podcast? Because like I said, you're pretty new to me. I haven't really listened to that podcast
Right.
at all, but
Oh,
that seemed like a really great experiment, though.
Yeah, I would say it was, successful on its own terms or whatever, and it definitely formed the way that I think about most of these sociopolitical issues now. But at the time, it was too taxing on my nervous system. Trump just really made my day-to-day life worse by having to think about and talk about him. Now that he's gone, I don't know. We'll see. Now it's more of an issue of grad school and time, honestly.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Maybe I'll start doing it once a month or something and bring it back.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I just get the sense that kind of thing is obviously kind of needed. Whatever
It
we
is
can do
needed.
to depolarize, literally, right? It's like
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
it's a bad situation, But
Yeah, that's true. We'll see. A few people have requested that I bring it back, and I'll think about it.
yeah,
Um,
well, good.
it's in some ways it's like you can't really be an expert on everything, and I'm focusing more on psychology now, and I don't know, maybe it's better to just do that well. Although
Yeah.
of course I could just do a show about political psychology more and stuff, and that would probably not be a waste of time. I would learn stuff
No.
that would help me.
Yeah.
Ooh, maybe that's the angle.
Yeah, I get it for sure. Well, I know we're kind of running out of time here, but man, I feel like we could have gone forever. There's so much we could talk about, like I said, with all our commonalities and all that. So,
Totally,
we
man.
should totally be friends.
Yeah, we should be
Yeah.
friends in real life. This is a great
Yeah.
conversation, man. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks for being on the show. It's been an honor. I really appreciate it. And yeah, maybe until next time.